on this computer, and we are recording. We are live and ready to go, and we are just so delighted to be here with you again. I am Donny Lowbrey,
and I'm Kirk Prime,
my beloved, and we are here with Flesh and Spirit and another episode of our Queer Tribes Conversation. And we are particularly gifted and honored to have with us today the Reverend Jim Mitulski. Jim, welcome, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so happy to be back here with you. It's been every 10 years like clockwork.
You know? Yeah,
that's great. We'll see how much has changed.
Yeah. Well, let me give, just for people who may not know you or want to be reminded, I'll give a brief introduction for Jim. Reverend Jim is an interim pastor at the Island United Church of Foster City. This is a UCC church in Foster City. And he is the development lead for major gifts at the Oakland Peace Center. And for the past 40 years, he has been the spiritual community organizer as a pastor of both queer and non-queer spiritual communities around the country. Those places associated with the metropolitan community churches, with the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, and the Fellowship of Affirming Ministry. He was also, may I say significantly, had a 15-year tenure at the MCC Church in San Francisco during the, what I love to call the high and holy years of AIDS, HIV in the 80s approximately. And he also 2 years as interim pastor of the largest GLBT church in the world, the Cathedral of Hope in Dallas. Jim has degrees from Columbia University, Pacific School of Religion, the Harvard Divinity School, and the Starr King School for the Ministry. He's a long-term survivor of HIV/AIDS and has a particular devotion to Mary, the mother of Jesus. He lives in Oakland with his feline companion, Keats.
Keats.
Wow.
Wow.
That's that's the whole lifetime. I have to take a breath.
So for good.
So
and
two of my favorite people in the universe are here.
Yes.
So that's
honey, we're so happy to see you guys.
Yeah.
Welcome, Michael. Welcome, Barbara.
Oh, good.
It's already a convergence. So
yes. Welcome, everyone.
Well,
so
let's go.
So for right now, we're going to be asking Jim our three favorite questions, and at the end, though, if you all want to unmute yourself to ask Jim any questions, we'll have a little bit of time to do that. So I'll be asking Jim just basically about your spiritual journey, about us as a queer tribe, your vision for us as a movement, and then we'll open it up to questions or anything else that just feels like germane to these times. So thank you, Jim. Your spiritual journey. Wow. I've heard 100,000 stories of parts of your spiritual journey. So, but refresh us and tell us.
We all have spiritual journeys. So, you've all heard, I know Kirk and I have been friends, I think since 1995 or so.
Yes, around there.
We connected in Key West just the summer before he moved to San Francisco, and just by chance in Key West, or if anything's by chance.
Yes.
And he had seen me in a video that I had done with Joe Kramer, as part of his Gay Sex Wisdom series for Aerospirit. And he just walked up to me, Kirk did, and said, "Didn't I just see you in a video about gay men in grief, like you do in a hot tub in Key West?" And it was as if we had always known each other, and I think that that's true on many levels. And he said, "And by the way, I'm moving to San Francisco," which everybody always used to say in those days, but he actually did. So, and I encouraged him to look me up when he got there, and I don't remember how, but we connected. So, which is a long way of saying I've been part of Flesh and Spirit since its very beginning, or its pre-beginnings. Right. We used to meet and talk about Kirk's dreams for creating spiritual community, particularly at that time, as we would say, among gay men. And I saw it go through many iterations, and I love the creativity, the energy, all of it, and have always felt a part of it, even when I'm away from it. So
well, you are.
So, and that's a long way of saying we've been having this conversation for a long time. So I've told a million stories. They're all true, and none of them are quite accurate. So the meaning changes over time, right?
Of course.
So it might be told differently. But for the purposes of this, I grew up as a Catholic, and at a time when the Catholic Church was so liberal, not the church I was born into necessarily, because we were still not even having church in English, but it matured into, in the 60s and 70s, a very a liberal spiritual organization where we were absolutely certain we would see the ordination of women by 1977 at the absolute latest, and that seems naive in retrospect, but it all seemed possible then. And I'm part of a generation of Catholics, I think, who we didn't leave the church, it left us. We were raised for it in a church that had an expectation of, where the heroes were, Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton and people like that. And we were swept up in the notion that the purpose of church is to change the world in positive ways, not to legislate women's bodies or to persecute gay people or to become colluders in governments that oppress gay people, or not just gay people, poor people. So, I was the generation that eased into, by the time I went to seminary in the 80s, we studied liberation theology as theology, the theology that was emerging at that time from Central and Latin America, in particular, that said the purpose of religion, and it was influenced directly by Marxism, my other favorite philosophy besides Christianity, that said the purpose of religion is to liberate people in this life, as well as to prepare them for the life to come. Which in the 70s and early 80s, the prepare them for the life to come part seemed kind of remote and almost, the Marxist critique that religion just pacifies people with this life in order to promise them something in the next. And I kind of believe that. And my AIDS experience, of course, really changed that. I believe in both the life to come and the importance of changing the world now. Yeah. So that's a one way of looking at it, at my spiritual journey. I moved to New York in 1976 to go to college at Columbia University, and quickly, and I chose it because they had gay dances on Friday nights, and it was in the college catalog, and that was the only school that I looked at that said that then. And then you think about it, who goes to a men's college in New York in the 1970s on purpose? Gay men. I mean, there were a few others, but and I also chose that school because some of my literary heroes, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, had gone to school there. And if I had another religion, I would say poetry is my religion. And I thought any school that Allen Ginsberg went to is the kind of place I want to be. So I found myself in New York in the mid-70s at the age of 18. Very exciting place to be, especially as a gay man. There was an energy in the air of change and revolution and sexuality that was tangible. And I think that's true for straight people living there as well as gay people at the time. And I just loved it. So I quickly found the Catholic Church was just not going to be my future, and started going to I became an Episcopalian first because that was a good kind of a way out of Catholicism. And it was liberal then. In a way that even it is not so much today, though it's gay accepting. And I learned something. You can be gay accepting and not progressive. And to me, progressive is more important than gay accepting. But eventually I found my way to MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, which met in a ragtag congregation in a church on 13th Street and 7th Avenue in Greenwich Village. We gathered there on Sunday nights in our best jeans and best t-shirts and reclaimed Christianity. And we weren't interested in a kind of Christianity where everything else was the same, but it was okay to be gay. We instead took our gay experience as the lens to which we examined Christianity. And then the litmus test for what we would either embrace or work to change was whether or not it was committed to the liberation of people. So if it was oppressive, We weren't interested, and we were happy to be radically experimental in it. You know, feminism was as important to us as homosexuality, the acceptance of homosexuality, and we were radically non-hierarchical values, which I still hold, and why I like MCC and the United Church of Christ generally is that it doesn't have a strong sense of clericalism. You know, it's the people are the church, and that's the kind of Catholicism that I was hoping to be raised in, you know, or that I was raised in and hoped the church would become. So I loved everything about MCC. It was informal. We used inclusive language, which the meaning of that has changed, of course, over the years. But for us at the time, what we said was, if it's important and it's about God, it has to be able to be expressed in language that is not solely masculine. So, you know, we took X-Acto knives to the hymn book and took out all the male pronouns. That was the technology then, X-Acto knife. Then you find the word in the same print typeface that you wanted to put back in. Then you would tape it and then re-Xerox it on a high quality Kodak machine. And then voila, you would have inclusive language hymns. And that was important to us. The language was important to us. What we said, and it was in flux. You know, we went through, I have to say, it seems naive now, but then we thought that God was the inclusive word for God. So we took out all the male pronouns and put the word God in. Well, now, you know, as we evolved and developed, that didn't seem adequate. But in the 70s was a big deal, right? And we looked at how we talked about Jesus. And my pastor at the time, who also taught me preaching, Karen Ziegler is her name, and we're still in touch. And she's a radical activist in Durham, North Carolina, where she became a nurse practitioner after leaving ministry and doing AIDS work. She used to say, the point of my being a lesbian is that no man is my Lord and no man is my master. So why would I want to sing hymns or talk about Jesus in a way that reinforces language of Lord and master? And of course, these are problematic constructs too around race. Lord, master, really? You know, are these the words you want to be using in relation to God? Even father, you know, Mary Daly, one of the theologians that we embraced, even with her shortcomings as time evolved, used to say that, you know, if we went for 1,000 years and just used female language for divinity, then maybe we could go back to using male language and female language interchangeably. But we've got a lot to overcome that's even in our DNA that we don't understand about how strongly we've been printed on male divinity. So even like father, forget it, you know. I've mellowed on a lot of these things because I've come to understand that the language that people choose is the language they should use, right? And I can't really understand what people's choices are, but they should have the radical freedom to choose the language that's liberating for them. So anyway, that's what drew me to MCC. It was gay. That's the bottom line. Gay church for gay people. Because one day I just got sick to my stomach of talking about how it's okay to be gay and be a Christian. Because I realized I just didn't give a rat's ass anymore. You know, I knew I was spiritual. I knew I was a Christian, but I just couldn't muster interest in convincing straight or gay people that it was okay. I had some patience for gay people because that was my people. But, you know, the notion of justifying one's presence in the church, you know, through elaborate apologetics, the Bible doesn't really condemn homosexuality. And, you know, that was the focus of our scholarship then in the 70s. I've got like 100 books here, literally, on the Bible and homosexuality and all these great academic, it caused everyone to revisit the Bible, not just around homosexuality, but sexuality, and also how women are depicted and how it offers first century authority constructs to postmodern people. And then you end up with an oppressive religion, right? So soon the question became, not immediately and not for everybody. And I've worked in the South where I want to say, maybe we'll talk about that later, where these questions about is it okay to be gay, and the Bible and homosexuality are still important. I don't really mean to be flippant about them. But I'm saying that for me, at that time, as a teenager, literally, and then in my early 20s in New York, the real question became, well, why do we care what the Bible says? Well, I love the Bible. I mean, I truly, really do. I don't know if mine is nearby, but, you know, I read it. It's an important book for me. You know, it's important for my spirituality. You can tell I have lots of notes in it. Have social histories of every church I've ever been the pastor of in the margins, including many stories about MCC San Francisco in it. But that's because I learned to write our stories into the Bible, you know. So I realized it's supposed to be an open book, not God's last will and testament. So I have, you know, pasted my favorite Walt Whitman poems in the front, and Edna St. Vincent Millay, and Adrienne Rich. And I do have the names of hundreds of people I've done funerals or weddings for. I have a little picture that I don't even know if you can see, but the mother of the woman who created this recently contacted me. And it's a picture of hearts. I don't know if that comes through clearly. Hand-drawn hearts, a whole page. And this little girl who was coming to MCC at the time, in the 80s, I guess, said, it's always so sad when you get up at the beginning of every Sunday and say, and this week we will have funerals for this person and that person and that person. And this is like a little girl. She said, I wanted you to have something in your Bible that you could look at to make you happy when you were beginning church. And her mother recently contacted me to say, and they watched my Easter service in Foster City via Zoom, who knew how they found me even, to say how important it was for them to be part of that church at that time. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, I think the Bible is important, but why should we let a book that was written 2,000 years ago with a worldview that doesn't recognize that women are people, but rather considers them to be property, and that sanctifies colonialism in a way, and slavery, in a way that has been used even into the present to justify colonialism and slavery. Why should that be the sole determinant about our spiritual life? Something as important as our spiritual lives. Why can't we read it with all that we know about our human experience and science and literature, and why can't it keep going? Why does it have to stop? So that's why I like that. This one used to have lots of blank pages, but now it doesn't. My friend Adam Dyer said that every time he went to church, he's an African-American, one of my best students at PSR, who's now the pastor at the First Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a very prestigious pulpit. And he was the first Black minister there in 350 years. He rewrote the letter to the Philemon, which is about slavery. And I pasted it in my Bible over Philemon. I can still look underneath and see it if I need to for study purposes. But I thought, this is how we're supposed to use the Bible as ongoing revelation, right? So I don't care if the Bible says in 2 places in Leviticus, thou shalt not lie with a man as with a woman. That's an abomination, and you should be killed if you do that. Guess what? I don't think anybody should be killed. That's ridiculous. That's spiritually crazy talk. So I learned to look for stories like the story of David and Jonathan, and the stories of Ruth and Naomi. And the same thing in the New Testament. You know, you could look at one verse in Romans that's very specific in its application and says nothing really about lesbianism. Or you could pick the story of Jesus and the 10 lepers in the Gospel of Luke and say, oh my God, reinterpreted? This is a story of the first Act Up chapter. And Jesus telling people who had been condemned by the religious authorities that rather than submit to their oppression by telling people when they first meet them, they were supposed to say, stay away from me, I'm unclean. Jesus says to them, you know what? Go march into the temple and show yourselves to the priests. And, you know, that's my Jesus. That's my Bible. And that's Act Up. That's right there. That's what we learn to do. So this is, you know, how my spiritual journey has evolved over the years, whether it's in spiritual communities like MCC New York, which was in Greenwich Village, MCC San Francisco, which was in the Castro district, during the most difficult of those AIDS years at that time. I've learned it by being pastor in little gritty Northeast Los Angeles, and Eagle Rock and Glendale, and in Guerneville, a rural community. And in my years as a campus pastor in Berkeley at the Pacific School of Religion, and in my years in Dallas at the biggest gay church in the world, and Denver, and most recently in Boston at a predominantly like 99.9% 200-year-old UCC church in a Tony suburb. And I learned something. I'd never really done ministry to that extent with and to people who weren't queer. And I learned everybody's queer, and everybody's got spiritual sorrows. And I think I might have learned more from them, but I think I gave them a ride for their money too. And we did some really important work there around immigration advocacy and activism. It took me getting into the United Church of Christ before I really was able to understand that LGBT liberation is not the only liberation show in town. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but what I have found more fully and been able to exercise more fully in the United Church of Christ is a multi-pronged approach to social justice and liberation that didn't quite fit MCC at the time, at least. Our vitality as a movement, as queer people, derives from our ability to be in solidarity and to acknowledge our own complicity in other kinds of oppressions, and to work in collaboration with everyone to overcome oppressions. You know, how do we say gay pride in 2020? We say Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
How do we say gay pride in 2020? We say abolish ICE. And we still say 2, 4, 6, 8. Gay is just as good as straight. 3, 5, 7, 9. Lesbians are mighty fine. You know, those old chants still, I think, speak to the heart of what it means to speak your truth and to be committed to listening to other people's truths and to engaging with them to bring about freedom for all of us. So how's that for a quick run through?
Wow. Wow.
40 years of church work.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I hear though is how much of your awakenings, and I'd love it if we tangibly could have your Bible and like each of us touch it, because it's like touching your whole life stories are all, you know, wrapped up in all the notes and things of your, but what I hear is liberation theology, freedom from oppression. Those are kind of keys to who you are as a queer man, a gay man, and who you've been in the world, and gathering others who are also like that. So leading into, well, before I go there, your spirituality, you told us a lot of kind of the academic pieces, but I know you as someone who, you know, in our work is obviously quite embodied, you know, who's had some really pretty amazing experiences, near-death experiences. So if there's anything else you want to share with us about your spirituality, that this is why I know what I know.
So when I went to the Castro in the mid-'80s, at the tender age of 27, I think, when I first went to be the pastor of a gay church that was in the grip of AIDS in a way that few places around the world were yet, you know. And there weren't a lot of churches in the Castro then. It was a Catholic church, that's all I'll say. There was a synagogue a block up from the church that was a gay synagogue, one of the first gay synagogues in the country. And there were a few other churches, but most of the churches of other denominations either got kicked out or closed down because they were too LGBT involved, engaged, identified. They were punished. Even there was a vibrant gay Catholic movement called Dignity. It's still there in San Francisco. When they lost their space, the Catholic Church in the Castro, which was full of gay people, did not allow them to meet in their building. They crammed into the little gay church on Eureka Street, a block away, on Sunday afternoons. And I just remembered that recently, that how that epitomized for me the spiritual struggle of that period. Let's put it that way. But I will say this, like, I was a snotty little preppy from the East Coast, plopped down in the middle of the Castro, and I thought the bike blessing at the Eagle was going to be about 10 speeds, not motorcycles. And my little button-down shirts, and I wore a suit every day. I don't even know why. I wore a charcoal gray suit to church, to work. That was Jim 1986. Jim 1996, chaps, harness, leather armband, and that was for work. No, just kidding. I didn't wear that to church. But I certainly gone through transformations, and a lot of it was moving from head to heart to body. And that's the gift of San Francisco. Who ends up here? It's a cultural and spiritual location, as well as a beautiful geographical location. And thus it has always been, I think, that it's a magnet. You come here, some people stay, some people leave. I come and go. I carry it in me, though, wherever I go. You have to do your San Francisco time, I think. And that's a little San Francisco centric. And I live in Oakland, by the way, which is cooler. And I don't mean temperature wise. I mean more bohemian, more artistic, more revolutionary than even San Francisco. Sorry to say it, San Franciscans, you're on the wrong side of the bay. But we don't want you all to know that, because we don't need more of you here. I moved from head to heart. And what moved me from head to heart, now it wasn't that I hadn't started there. My church in Greenwich Village, that was the epicenter of AIDS then. I visited people, the very first people with HIV at St. Vincent's Hospital, which was a block from where the church was. That's on 12th Street. Church is on 13th Street and 7th Avenue. And that was when, they called and said, we need someone, we have gay people here that no one will visit, and we need someone to come. And I hadn't even been to seminary yet, to be honest. But I went over there bringing communion, and we had to wear these spacesuits that, and I'm not exaggerating, you've seen them a few times when there's a severe epidemiological outbreak that they don't know, Ebola, AIDS, right now with coronavirus, which we might talk about at some point if we have time. That was for my protection and for the patient's protection too. We truly did not know what AIDS was and what was causing it. And it was quickly terminal for the people who had it. The first wave of infection took the people who were most vulnerable to it. So I just thinking about that. I'm not going to cry this time. I swear to God, I'm not. But it was a tough time, let's just say. So it was hard to be solely in your head, and to be present to what was happening in the bodies of the people that who are most affected by it. Those stories you hear about food being left outside people's rooms, I saw that. I carried food into people's rooms, not that I'm that noble or virtuous, but I couldn't not, and I was probably too stupid to even understand all the signs. But my faith hadn't really matured enough to understand the value of the afterlife, of the life to come. What do we say in the creed? I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life of the world to come. The communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, all those phrases, that, were meaningful in their way. The Hail Mary prayer I learned as a child. Hail Mary, full of grace, those blessed art thou amongst women, blessed art thou, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. I memorized those. They didn't have meaning to me, but I've come to understand that they were seeds planted that would become useful to me and also to the people that I was ministering to. But I was just, like I said, the snotty little Marxist from Morningside Heights, working in the village, and nobody talked about heaven. That was just a silly construct, for people who had sentimental and very shallow understandings. I repent of those early years of righteous judgment that I was capable of. It was part of breaking through into a faith that wasn't superstitious. And by superstitious, I mean fear-bound, because that's what I was raised with. too. And it's hard to get over. So you have to reject a lot in order to get to a point where you're no longer reacting against it. I was in the middle of my phase when I first started to encounter large numbers of young people my age in my 20s, dying. I mean, I look back on it now, I don't even know how any of us survived the shred of sanity. And I say that knowing that I don't think I did. I mean, I survived and I have maybe a shred, but they're more random strands of sanity intermixed because we were up in the suffering in a way. And here was the hardest part. If you weren't directly touched by it, people didn't care. Okay, let me say it a different way. AIDS, early 80s, right? What did we see? We saw religious leaders who were saying, oh, it's God's punishment. And we saw political leaders, and I saw these pictures, I saw it in Congress, waving their Bibles saying, we're not going to approve money for research or for treatment. This is God's way of purging the population of undesirable people. And so I'm very sensitive to that language when I hear about undesirable, unwantable, dispensable. That's why I have people talk about immigrants all the time. And so when I hear it, I know it. I know the ugliness of it because I've seen it. So all through the 80s, we could have done a lot more for AIDS research and treatment than we did. And our country lagged behind and really only became truly interested in it when the French started developing pharmaceuticals that they realized could be lucrative. And profit drove that shift of interest, not empathy. Right? So that's just my opinion, but I held the hands of enough people who were making a transition from this life to what I thought, if I thought about it very much, I just thought they were dying. And I'm embarrassed about that now, but I was young and I was there. I showed up, so some credit for that. But I didn't even, my mind, I hadn't lived enough years to understand the importance of believing in eternal life. And this is my Christian construct. I know that there are lots of other ways that people talk about what happens when you die, whether it's reincarnation or just death, but I'm a Christian and I believe I am the resurrection and the life. I didn't understand it, but I had memorized it, and then those words became life in me. I am resurrection. That means there's more than we see. And that became a very important consolation when people were suffering in the ways that they were suffering physically, in ways that you can't even imagine now, and I am life. That's what Jesus said. I am the resurrection and I am the life. That means the mortal life we have now, abundant life. I've come that you may have life in all its fullness, John 10:10, that became important to me. So, and that's why even the questions that people had spiritually around the Bible and homosexuality and whether they would go to hell when they died and whether they were being punished, I took those to heart. I entered into their situations to understand it so that they were not alone in it. And then from that vantage point, whole worlds opened up for me spiritually, and that's even before, that was in New York, but San Francisco, boy, that was a crash course. Our little church on Eureka Street. I saw the building from a distance when I walked there. It was a January, I still remember, January, December, perfectly gruesome day in New York. I'm not old enough. I don't have the education to take this job that I've applied for. And their interest in me is because I've been doing AIDS work. And I had a degree, but it wasn't a divinity degree. It was a religion degree. But I'd been doing AIDS work. That was it. That's all that they couldn't find someone to pastor this church. In fact, there'd been 8 pastors in 15 years before I got there. So it didn't exactly seem like a plum job to a lot of people. And I was a New Yorker by adoption, so a zealous New Yorker, I wasn't going to go live in California. Where is California? I didn't even know, it doesn't seem real to me. It was a beautiful day in January or December. It was like so gruesome winter in New York. I'm like, oh my God, I saw that little church building and I instantly knew that the next phase of my life was going to be there. And I can't explain it. I can't tell you why. I think I was, as I said, I was too young, too inexperienced, but I brought something, a certain quality of that I had learned in politics, that you just don't give up.
Yeah.
And that became the basis of that. I think that's why they hired me.
Yeah.
And they agreed to send me to seminary. And they said, yeah, do whatever you want. We don't care. Just take this job. So I did. And I couldn't even do it again now because I worked full time, went to school full time in Berkeley. But we were called, and it wasn't just me. If it had been just me, I couldn't have done it. It would have destroyed me. But it was there. It became a magnet, that church, that little church, as did the Castro, I would say at the time. Not perfect, but for people who did not believe in giving up, and who came to understand that there was more to life than the material. But people's material circumstances really were valuable and required our devotion and our attention. And that's how I got involved in it. And it was over time, singing these gospel songs that we used to sing at MCC Church that I look back on. When I first heard them, I thought, you are kidding me. I am going to sing a song that says, when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. I mean, I thought, what the heck is this? This is crazy. This is 19th century evangelical nonsense. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that now because I had to come almost from that place of cynicism until my heart opened and I realized we were talking about something very important. Nobody died alone. We believed we would all get to heaven. And that also human suffering would not be the last thing that a person's spirit or essence experienced. That there would be vindication. There would be resurrection that was bigger than crucifixion. So I was first a Catholic, then a recovering Catholic, then a super liberal, basically Unitarian. And I say that with love for the Unitarian Church, but it wasn't Christian. And then it's become what I think I still am now, a kind of a Catholic that loves evangelical worship, the fervor, the heart. I'm telling you, on Sunday nights in the Castro, like you do in gay world. No, it was not like what people expected. We packed this little church that had 150 seats in it, frequently with 250 people, out the door, in the aisles, in the alley next door to it, the windows open, and we sang these gospel songs. We laid hands on each other for healing. We and it wasn't like quick little Protestant worship, 60 minutes, you're in, you're out. It was worship that started at 7 and would go till past 9 o'clock, sometimes as late as 10. Not because we were doing, not because I was preaching for an hour and a half. Mostly we sang. It was our catharsis. Yeah. And also it was our spirit time. People just let loose. Yeah. And there was such power in the room. Yeah. And, I remember standing at the door at 9 o'clock at the end of the service, and people would just keep singing. They wouldn't stop because they were receiving and charging up for a very difficult time in all of our lives. Yeah. Yeah. And we were up in politics too. It was not just about illness and death. We learned to advocate for healthcare. The biggest freaking scandal of the end of the 20th century, and we are reaping it right now, is that we lived through AIDS and somehow did not get universal health care for every single person, regardless of ability to pay or regardless of insurance. How did we go through an epidemic and not come out with that as our tangible gain? And we're seeing what happens now. Who gets health care? Who gets a COVID? Who gets the attention? And who does not? Yeah. And where does it thrive? Yeah. It's so eerily similar. I understand that there are important medical and epidemiological differences, but I learned that, advocating for healthcare is a religious impulse. Yeah. It's a spiritual impulse. The body, and this is Kirk's work. I know Kirk is about flesh and spirit, and Donny, you too. But I practically think that for those of us who grew up in Christianity, spirit is easier than flesh. You know, to say flesh, the body. This was the queer contribution to Christianity that we brought through AIDS, and that people like Kirk got us to do. And I don't mean to minimize other people that did it, but you know, Kirk really was a pioneer in this bringing together of flesh and spirit. Christians, liberal Christians, you know, at best, we don't talk about sexuality. You know, I worked at the most liberal seminary in the country, Pacific School of Religion, a couple of different times now in different capacities. And I pastored a church on the campus for several years. You know how we dealt with sexuality in the liberal seminary? We didn't talk about it that much. That was liberal. So we didn't tell people this is wrong, that's wrong, don't masturbate, you can't get married more than once, don't have premarital sex. But we never talked about it proactively, right? So the liberal response is to leave it as a matter of personal concern. Well, that's progress. You know, it's not making people's decisions for them. It's not shaming them about their body, but it's not encouraging them to have a language for it either. What I think that we did, and Kirk did this really important work with our seminarians for MCC that I wished all the other seminarians could have access to, but only MCC could do it at the time. He came and helped us talk about our bodies. Do you remember the programs I'm talking about, Kirk? Yeah. And even in our church, you know, Eric Rofus was another guy, of blessed memory, who also really pushed us to have programs at MCC Church like women talking sex, men talking sex, men and women talking sex. Well, you know, now they've gone too far. And I don't believe that. I'm just saying that at the time we were always finding what the edge was and then taking it a little bit further. And we could do that there. You know, it was free space. It was entrepreneurial, unfettered, truly experimental space for body and spirit in a way that I lament for the current generation of younger people who I think have been frightened into a more private and quiet discourse around sexuality and practice too. You know, we had something going there, and that was important.
Yeah. So Jim, I'm aware of our time, and I wish we had hours actually to just keep talking, because I'm getting so many gems, and I'm sure everybody on the call. So I want to actually be able to let them speak to you for a minute. But before we open the line for them to ask you any questions, just kind of snippets of the last question that we usually ask, which is about the vision for our movement, for us as queer people. Do you have kind of a vision? Do you, I mean, your whole life is like creating that vision and holding it in your body through all the activism and freedom and justice stuff that you do. But is there a vision, especially during these times of Black Lives Matter, COVID? You know, briefly share what comes to mind.
So my quick answer, and I have no quick answers, and talking is how I learn. So you've known me a long time. Don't ask the blabbermouth to come on.
Oh, we're so glad. Yeah.
Short sentences. You know, I like long, complex sentences with semicolons and clauses. That's how I talk. That's how I write. So, you know, I want to reclaim and reassert gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex. Those are the most common words that I think. My only concern about when we start to use acronyms only is that we lose the specificities. I want our movement to reclaim the specificities as well as to seek the unity in the big piece, because it's too easy for us to fall back into not talking about sex, body. There, I've said it. And so I just wanted to say that one piece.
Yes.
Equally important is to understand that this is a portal and a bridge to other liberation movements, many of whom are not just intersectional, but overlapping with sometimes what people think GLBTQ plus is. So I can't say this enough. Today we say Black Lives Matter as an affirmation, as an aspiration, as a commitment. I saw a column by Charles Blow in the New York Times where he said, this is not the Coachella Valley moment. This is not the Woodstock moment. You've got to sustain this. White people, can we trust you not to lose interest as the public eye moves along? You know, I'm paraphrasing him, but I think Charles Blow was like brilliant. So that, and I really want to say this right now, people who are exercising the human right of migration are so imperiled. And do you know how so many of us ended up in New York or San Francisco? We exercised the human right of migration. And it's just by chance. We didn't have to cross a border to do it.
Yeah.
And that has got to be our moment. Children in cages, their parents in cages, you know, that Supreme Court decision about anti-LGBT discrimination that borrows from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, an anti-racist piece of legislation that calls us to say, those children right now, the 120 children that the court decided on Friday night have to be released from ICE detention in ICE prison, that's our get in the streets moment, except we can't be in the streets right now in the same way. And this is our challenge. But you know what? We never let any one thing stop us in our innovation and exploration. So even COVID, even with the knowledge of, as we try to understand what it means and how it's transmitted, with a reverence for preserving one another's life and health, we still have got to find ways to exercise dissent, protest, and to use our bodies to do it, as well as our voices, our minds, hearts, and bodies. That's my vision for queer movement.
Great, thank you. Those are juicy. We may have to have you come back.
Yes,
but I do want to open it up, and I know that we're running a little over, so some people may need to leave. But just giving you all an opportunity, if you want, for a minute, just to ask anything of Jim before we close our call. So if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question before we close the call.
Yes. Just go ahead and unmute yourself. You've probably all done this before. The icon is in the bottom left. Barbara.
Yes, great.
Thank you so much, Jim. It is such a gift to use. I'm just wondering, in this particular moment in time, with a lot of white people becoming more awake and aware, at least speaking for myself, and being conscious of white fragility, I just wonder where you see that, how you see that part fitting into what our priorities need to be in the next months or years.
All right, so if I'm reading your question correctly, it's partly as the white person, and I'm a white person responding, we have to be willing to do the work that we expected others to do for us, with us. That's a simple answer, but I think it's one way to do it. So tomorrow at 1:30, my little church in Foster City, there'll be 10 of us who are reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. And the Foster City Church is Presbyterian, Methodist, Congregationalist, mixed union congregation, affiliated with the United Church of Christ, mostly older people, half Asian and half European American, simply speaking. We are reading this book together as just one example. You know, you asked for a specificity.
Yeah.
I think this is one thing. It's not everything, but we have to learn and we have to do it and we have to take it seriously. Yeah. And, you know, the racism that is so intrinsic in our white supremacist and American culture goes back to slavery, the slavery that built this country. And it's a Southern and a Northern thing too, having worked and lived all over the country, in the South and in the North, in Boston, where they would say, well, that's really a Southern problem. And Boston is the most racist city in the country that I've ever lived in. And there are many people who've lived there who would say the same about it. and a city that was built on slavery in order to build its linens and textiles industry, and where slaves were first bred in Boston Harbor on an island as a way of making even more profit. I mean, it's disgusting, right? So we have got to understand this and take it as our own. Now we know that GLBTQ is also every race and every social class and many genders, but if we're not talking about race, if we're not engaged in anti-racist work right now, then we are not part of it. We are not doing our work.
Great.
You know, I say as a pastor right now, this is my personal discipline. And this was true even when I was at MCC, some of you will remember, but if you come to church and we didn't address racism and our opportunity to learn, change, be different by embracing anti-racist ways, then I failed. I get an F for that Sunday as the person who's the community organizer of the spiritual gathering.
Great.
Doesn't mean I have to do it or I'm the only one, but that's what we have to be paying attention to. This is why we come together in spiritual community right now.
Great.
This is the reason, because of white supremacy and racism and what it's doing to our country and to the earth.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And there's still a couple of people here. So if any one of you wants just for 1 minute, and then we are going to have to close. Anybody else? And thank you, Barbara.
Well, I was just thinking, there's not really questions, as it were, these thoughts that came to my head as Jim was talking through. And I think when he goes back to the idea of talking about politicians and religious people, you know, with the Bibles and stopping things, I also think that was we always say, the enemy within, right? Especially in those earlier years. I mean, those were people that weren't our kind, right? If you were a certain kind of gay person, you know, and we used to make the joke NOCD, right? Which is borrowing from the British of not our class dear. And it was happening to the other people. And then all of a sudden it was happening to us. And then the other thing, when he was talking about the body and flesh and spirit, Richard Rohr in Breathing Underwater speaks about Christianity being the only religion that calls for the incarnate God, yet reviles the body, which I thought that's very profound, very profound.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last thing that came to my mind is listening to him is I think we've come to a place, we've gone through our struggle in a certain way, and then there's this complacency that exists. And I would go as far as to say the sin of complacency.
Yeah.
Right? I got mine and I'm happy where I am.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to say, oh, I understand you're tired. It costs a lot of money to live in San Francisco and you have to work hard to live in this area. But that does not mean you have the excuse of saying, oh, I'm too tired to go out and do that today. You know, I would often remember back in the late 90s when we would go after church service and go to an ACT UP thing down at Powell Street. And we were supposed to sing at, 9:30 and it was 11:30 before we did anything. And there was still that core group of people who would go and do something. And, now we can get maybe 5. Yeah. And I'm not saying that, that's not particular to the community, but I'm just saying in general, right? It's hard to get people motivated, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. All right, beloveds, we've run over. So what a delightful call. And Jim, thank you so much. We're here.
Thank you. I really appreciate your ministry and what you're doing. And happy Pride Day to everyone.
Yeah. So this call will be posted. So if you want to review it, we'll be posting it, and it'll go out to about 1,000 people. So anything else in closing that you want to plug, Jim, and we'll say goodbye.
Well, I wasn't prepared for that. I'll say this: support Flesh and Spirit and the work that they do. I mean that. I'm a development guy, right?
Yeah.
I raise money. Support Flesh and Spirit. They won't say it about themselves. I'll say it. They have helped restore life to people. And I'll make one more plug. the Oakland Peace Center, oaklandpeacecenter.org. It's where I work. We are building an anti-gentrification, cooperative, anti-racist community center in downtown Oakland. And there's never been a more important time to bring peace principles to bear in community organizing. And we literally have a 45,000 square foot building that needs a lot of deferred maintenance work.
Great. Great.
So send your money. Oakland
Send the money. Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, beloved Jim, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are just feel very honored and blessed to have this time with you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And so thank all of you who are out there that have come to listen to us. Kirk and I are always delighted to have people like Jim and others present their views and their ideas about the queer tribe, and to hopefully provide some insight and some inspiration to all of us.
Yes.
So thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, and for those who want to stay in contact with us, I think all of you are already there, but fleshandspirit.org is our website. All right, yes. Beloveds, namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, and blessings.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.